The domestic work sector has historically been poorly regulated, and workers have been excluded from basic labor protections. Domestic workers are still excluded from the National Labor Relations Act, the federal law that guarantees workers the right to form unions, and the Occupational Safety and Health Act, which sets workplace safety protections. To counteract these exclusions, campaigning has focused around legislative protections at the state level. The Massachusetts Domestic Workers Bill of Rights is a set of legislation that protect many domestic workers' basic workplace rights. Domestic workers make all other work possible. The origins of the Massachusetts Domestic Workers Bill of Rights began in 2010 when the Massachusetts Coalition of Domestic Workers was founded. Campaigning and advocacy by the coalition culminated in the passing of the Bill of Rights in 2014. The law officially came into effect in 2015. You can find a copy of the exact text in the Session Laws of Massachusetts within the Acts of 2014 in Chapter 148. This session law changed the general laws by updating Chapter 149, specifically through creating Section 190 and 191, and revising Chapters 151, 151A, 151B, and 153. So what legal rights do domestic workers have? Record keeping. Anyone who hires a domestic worker for 16 hours or more a week is required to provide a written employment agreement. This contract must be in a language the worker speaks and needs to include the following 10 things. 1. Rate of pay. This section should include specifics about overtime pay and any additional compensation offered for added duties or multilingual skills. 2. Working hours, including meal breaks and other time off. 3. Benefits. If offered, this section would include provided days of rest, sick days, vacation days, personal days, and holidays. It may include covering costs for transportation or health insurance, and it may include severance, yearly raises. This section should also specify whether these costs are paid up front or reimbursed. 4. Fees. This section should list any costs, including costs for meals and lodging, that might be deducted from a worker's pay. 5. Work responsibilities. All the responsibilities associated with the job. 6. Grievances and raises. This section is about the process of addressing unforeseen issues. It should outline a clear process for raising and addressing grievances, and it should also explain the process for raising wages if new duties are added that were not specified in the original contract. 7. Workers' compensation. The right to collect compensation if injured. 8. Privacy standards. This section is applicable for situations where the domestic worker is living within the employer's residence and should outline the specific circumstances when they may enter a worker's living space. 9. Notice for termination. A contract should set in writing the expected amount of time in advance each should give to the other party when a worker is resigning or an employer is firing them. 10. Any other rights or benefits afforded to the domestic worker in this employment agreement. Along with the contract, employers are legally required to provide a notice that contains all applicable state and federal laws that apply to the employment of domestic workers. The employer must also provide written pay records throughout your employment. Domestic workers may request a written evaluation of work performance after 3 months of employment and every year after. Workers have the right to inspect and dispute this written evaluation. You can find samples of required documentation on our website at www.massdomesticworkers.org/en/documents. Wages. Domestic workers are guaranteed at least minimum wage. In 2022, domestic workers in Massachusetts should be earning at minimum $14.25 per hour. In 2023, that should be $15 an hour. If a worker is paid less than this, they are the victim of wage theft. Wage deductions, including deductions for food, lodging, rest periods, or sleeping periods, are legal only when freely chosen and desired by the domestic worker and consented to in writing. Chapter 149, Section 190, subsection G states, "An employer shall not deduct an amount from the wages of a domestic worker for lodging that exceeds the amount permitted pursuant to Chapter 151, meaning even after deductions, pay must equal at least minimum wage. It is illegal for employers to retaliate against domestic workers for making wage complaints. Time off. Anyone who employs a domestic worker for 40 hours a week or more is legally required to provide at least 24 hours off per a 7-day calendar week, and 48 continuous hours, meaning a full 2-day weekend, at least once a month. Whenever possible, time off should accommodate a worker's religious worship or spiritual practice. For example, a practicing Jewish worker may prefer Saturdays off, whereas a practicing Catholic worker may prefer Sundays off. Many domestic workers are not scheduled 40 hours a week by the same employer. However, there are still rights afforded to domestic workers no matter how many hours they are employed a week. After working with the same employer for 3 months, workers begin to accrue 1 hour of job-protected sick leave for every 30 hours of work. They can earn and use up to 40 hours of job-protected sick leave each year. Domestic workers also have the right to 8 weeks of job-protected parental leave for the birth or adoption of a child. Housing. According to Chapter 149, Section 190, subsection G, housing for domestic workers must meet the standards and regulations for adequate, decent, and sanitary lodging specified by Chapters 111 and 151. The relevant section, Minimum Standards of Fitness for Human Habitation, is Chapter 2 of the State Sanitary Code. This can be found in Title 105 of the Code of Massachusetts Regulations, CMR, in Section 410. This includes regulations on kitchen facilities, bathrooms, plumbing, temperature regulation, ventilation, minimum square footage, and other important aspects of sanitation and safety. If a domestic worker lives in the employer's household and the employer fires them without cause, the employer must provide written notice and at least 30 days of lodging or severance pay in an amount equivalent to 2 weeks of work. Injury. Employees injured while at work have rights to compensation and action against the employer. What laws protect domestic workers from discrimination, abuse, and trafficking? It is illegal for an employer to restrict or interfere with a domestic worker's means of private communication, monitor a domestic worker's private communications, or take any of the domestic worker's documents or other personal effects. It is illegal for an employer to engage in unwelcome sexual advances, coerced requests for sexual favors, or other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. It is illegal for an employer to subject a domestic worker to unwelcome harassment based on sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, race, color, age, religion, national origin, or disability. And it is illegal for an employer to engage in any conduct which constitutes forced services or trafficking of a person, whether or not sex is involved. Have your rights been violated? We recommend reaching out to a local worker center for support. Worker centers have resources to help workers fight wage theft and other workplace rights violations through legal and community-based strategies. Some also train immigrant workers specifically on workplace rights and connect these workers with a larger community of workers in struggle. Here in Boston, Massachusetts, there are a number of worker centers, including Brazilian Worker Center, Brazilian Women's Group, Chinese Progressive Association, Maskosh, Matahari Women's Worker Center. You can find contact information for other worker centers in Massachusetts and learn more about the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights on our website, www.mass.gov. massdomesticworkers.org/en/bill-of-rights.